Wow,
you,
Cynthia, that was beautiful.
Thank you.
That was just, that was so
competition.
powerful and so beautiful. This is Dia talking.
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much. That was just wonderful.
Thank you. I'm glad you liked
We have
it.
time for a few questions. Early in on the ground floor was Nikos.
All right, Cynthia, that was very impressive. Thank you very much for the background. I mean, I followed your work on the C.S. Lewis novels and thought it was very well put together, and how C.S. Lewis was trying to hold back the tide, if you like, of the H.G. Wells view. And at the end tonight, you put the abolition of man in its place very helpfully. I think it is difficult to ignore the effect of education on the most people in the world at the moment, especially the Western world, because it's this idea that we're totally at a loss with science. Science rules everything to such an extent that we're not able to grapple with any of the issues. We're told this, we're told that, and as Mr. Harari was saying in his speeches, you know, it's all sorted and organized, guys. All you got to do is sit back and let us do everything because we have the technology.
Actually, if I can just interject, it's not so much science they are pushing as the falsification of science, such as the CO2 being a threat to the planet, etc., and all the lies about COVID. So the science is being shoved down our throats is not science at all. It's a bunch of lies about science, bolstered by things such as fake computer projections and so on, and actually bought studies and corrupted scientists and so on. I'm sorry, I'll just leave that now.
No, that's fine. I agree. It's the mechanization of science. We talked about this 2 weeks ago, you know, how important it is. The game theory all came out of the Macy conference. All these things are, but for the 5% of people such as us who are grappling with these topics and trying to see all these things, most people, the 95% of people, have sort of given up, in my opinion. They're not able to reason, and so they've lost touch with any idea of a greater good, whether we call it Tao or whatever. That's the problem as I see it. And I was hoping Cynthia was going to show how we're going to reach out. I mean, how in our small way we can reach out to people.
Well, this is the genius of their PSYOP. Also, they have planned this for decades. For instance, the whole COVID.
Hold up, Harinder.
Sorry.
I saw your name on the list. I'll call upon you to
if I could just finish off and let Harinder carry on, or Bruce. But it's so, as he says, I mean, it has been going. There's quotes from H.G. Wells, The Open Society, The Open Conspiracy. It's so interesting, isn't it, how accurately he expresses what is actually happening, and especially what's been happening in the last 3 years. I mean, I was very impressed. That it certainly has been going on for decades. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nikos. Well, I think people, first of all, need to keep in mind and appreciate how much energy they have to put into pumping this ideology constantly within the system, because it is very unnatural and we are not born to think this way, and we will constantly, you know, be pushing back, whether we're conscious or not, against such a way of thinking. And so it's not a system that is ultimately self-sustaining. We are living in a system that is suffering from the physical consequences of these absurdities and this false science. It's a system that's collapsing. It's a system that, you know, for the long, I mean, Matt has gone over, you know, a bit more of a historical overview of the nature of empire and how it has to keep, you know, going to a different host. But at this point, the Anglo-American empire, for lack of a better word for it, doesn't have another host to jump onto right now. It's a dying system. So we have to be aware of that. And I think you know, the danger in this, but also the potential, the great potential is that we can, in this collapsing system, we can take back a certain amount of control, because there are increasingly, I think, more people who are realizing the massive holes in the narrative that we've been told in terms of how science works, even like, you know, the how economics works, or how energy functions. Because we are just living in a world that can't continue such big lies in a very convincing way for anyone who's doing a little bit of, you know, digging into these things. So it's unnatural. They have to put in a lot of energy into this kind of control system, and they think that it's attainable to have this kind of, you know, Orwellian world of you know, controlling thoughts. It's been a thing that they've been trying for a very long time, and they really thought the field of genetics was going to give that to them. They haven't been able to obtain these things. So this is they've hit a bit of a dead end, because I think that they were convinced that they could do these things. It wasn't just to try to give lies to people, but they really think that they can change the construct, the biological construct of what it is to be a human. And as we see in looking into these endeavors, it's a massive failure. But not only that, we see that there's always historically something that is more lawful that does start to come out of that kind of sinking, collapsing system. And the tragedy for us is that we have been going back and forth between this sort of thing, but I do qualitatively see where we're at today as a different than where we've ever been in historically. We're not just repeating history. We are really at a point that is going to be, I think, exiting out of an old system of empire. And again, it's just because we've become so connected as well in the world that the old forms of control and everything, they're so inadequate anyway. Like, these sorts of things are not going to be able to have the governance that they thought that they were going to be able to achieve. So it's good news in that sense. And I never focus on the numbers of how many people can you recruit very quickly. It's always the quality of the people that matters most, and most people are followers. So if you can, you know, give a competent leadership, you can form, like in the case of Rising Tide, I think our biggest ambition is to eventually have a larger educational role in content for all ages, but especially for the youth. But you realize too that in a collapsing system, people who are mostly followers are going to just jump onto, you know, another system that is clearly showing some solution orientation in it. So it's disappointing. I agree that the majority of people have historically been like this, but they've historically been like this. I don't think it necessarily has to be like this forever, but it's going to be like this for the foreseeable future, that most people are followers. But that's also good news, that you don't have to be bogged down by how they think, because if they're introduced to something better in a competent fashion, and the lies that they're living in are exposed to them, as what is clearly happening now, where we're living in a system that has so many contradictions within it. There is always a possibility for those people to become very different in their orientation. It's not stable, but it's not as big of a problem as we may think. You don't have to recruit everybody.
You know, I think your point is really good, that most people They don't know necessarily on a conscious level, but they know on at the very least the oligarchy is not able to crush the deeper nature and the deeper instincts of humanity, which yearns no matter what for certain things that humans yearn for. You know, bees yearn for things that are for the bees. You know, making honey. They find attraction to bees, and you know they're happy being bees. And human beings, we're a creature also of intellect, right? We form concepts as you've outlined here, and I think you've really put a lot of definition, more so than most people have exposure to, of the governing concepts that have been shaping the fabric of the past, you know, generations that brought us to the current situation. And it's really valuable. You could act more powerfully when you have a concrete sense of causality, and obviously that's the best of the best. But most people, when you tell them that they're a fish, but they're humans, they breathe oxygen, fish don't. But you tell them that at a certain point, they might think that they're fish, they might act like fish for a few minutes, but the demands for oxygen will impose themselves even if they don't realize it, and they will gasp. They will and if you have some few, it doesn't have to be the majority, but if you have some few who have made themselves competent, qualified around internalizing the core ideas that and can provide some leadership, like we saw in so many cases throughout human history, or even in today's world, that's, you know, not like everybody in Eurasia thinks like a, you know, an epistemologically solid grand strategist, but the fact that you have a few who do has given an energy to the masses who organically resonate with that need for a future, to feed your family, to have a world that is not based upon a death cult. It always kind of works out, or it that has tended to be a theme which is more powerful than even what the oligarchy wants. And I think you did that so well in this class and in your response to Nikos. Very, very empowering way of thinking about this. Bruce has been waiting for a bit. Bruce.
Oh, you're muted, Bruce.
Oh yeah, everyone's muted. Yeah, there you go. He's on it.
Thank you. Cynthia, what do you think about this? I'm calling it for today the immaturity theory. It's this, you know, the impulses rule and the hedonism and no values. It's the definition of immaturity. It's the savagery of childhood where might makes right. That's what I hear from the prognostications of the World Economic Forum. And it's might makes right until the concept of rights enters anybody's head. And that is still the American Revolution, where rights can make might. And also the Tao, the way, the natural law, I think it's premised on identity. And then you, toward the end, described this as an existential crisis. And I've often thought, by definition, an existential crisis is the question, who am I? And the way, or the natural law, is, as you even reflected on the quote by Jesus that appeared in the text, do unto others, because I love the idea that all is us. That is reality. And that's why it works. When I do unto you anything nice, I'm literally doing something nice to myself. There's something of an illusion in this separation of. And your last 2 or 3 minutes alone should be broadcast to the world. I love how you just described what the purpose and mission of the Rising Tide Foundation is. I love how simply you defined, most people are followers. And if we just can comprehend enough truth that works for us as individuals and put it out there, which is a definition of reality, of how it works, how thoughts and kindness, etc., work. And for things that work, I want to briefly promote this endeavor I'm doing with the company I work for, is Trine Day Publishing, which for 20 years has published groundbreaking books about the folks in the shadows and the horrible things behind the scenes. And every month we've been doing this roundtable series, and it has evolved into the development of a plan for world peace, nothing less ambitious than a plan for world peace based on economic justice. And the latest iteration of it, the spearhead of it, the launch of the campaign, is an open letter to King Charles III on his coronation by Earth Rights visionary Alana Hartsock. And where everyone can go read about it at valediction.net, valediction.net/world-peace, the world peace thing. I'll repeat it again in a second, because it's an education of the economics of an American named Henry George, who wrote in the 1800s, and particularly his book, Progress and Poverty. And only Mark Twain was more popular than he in the 1800s as a public speaker. And it's based on taxing land, not our improvements on it in a whole new way. It's the earth rights economics. It's all new to me in the last few months. But if anybody's mind, it's, in there, it fits so well in my understanding of all I've seen taught from Rising Tide about the American system and the economics of Henry C. Carey. Valediction.net. Check that out. And Cynthia, I host a radio show live every Saturday. Will you be my guest for an hour some Saturday soon, please?
Yes, I would love to, Bruce.
Thank you. Now, I'd love your thoughts on anything I may have just said.
Yeah, I know Sean was asking for the name of the publication company, Trine Day. Oh, wow, Peter's really fast. He already answered the question. Yeah, Trine Day is a really wonderful publishing company, and the work that you do, Bruce, is also very, it makes us feel more optimistic that we have people like you out there. You're a really good guy, really good soul that, it makes you feel a little bit better that we still have people like yourself out there. And this idea of, might makes right. I thought that was an interesting way of framing it, until we question, like, what is this idea of right? And I think that, again, to somewhat reiterate what I was saying before, people are followers, but they can only go so far into something that is unnatural. And most people are not capable of going past a certain point. I think, we can take comfort in that even though there's this element of disappointment, we are so in tune with the way that the universe has been created, which is lawful. It's towards the good. It's towards ever perfectibility. That, as you said again, Bruce, you're happy when you're participating in that, and it's not just for a selfish motivation. We are happiest when we feel that we are contributing, that we're making an important contribution to society. I think everyone feels most fulfilled when they feel that they're a participant on that. It doesn't have to be some kind of lofty accomplishment, but you're merely a participant. That's a little bit of like the pride of an American, right? Because it used to be for a while a really good thing what the United States represented in terms of being anti-imperialistic, that it wanted to help these former colonies to have independence. And there was a certain kind of pride in to be an American, because you to be an American represented these ideas. So you could be doing any kind of a job. You could be a janitor, you could be a bus driver, you could be, a scientist, but everybody was happy to be participating within such a system that they believed was working towards the good. Even though it was an imperfect system, it still is historically something that went against system of empire in such a successful way. Historically, there's really been nothing on that level of achievement and success. So we are all happiest when we are good. And I think that's why people are so miserable right now as well. Everyone's going to, I think, come to this realization in their own way. But I think in the last few years, people have already been challenged to such an extent that they can't continue to live the lie, because it's become too obvious, and also just too dehumanizing at this point.
What was the name of the book of yours you mentioned? The Empire Where What Never Sets, or something?
The Empire really should have maybe named it something different. The Empire in Which the Black Sun Never Sets is the name of my book. Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you. And Matt will give you my email address to tell me, then I'll send you available dates and we'll get you on my show ASAP.
Cool.
Thank
Looking
you.
forward to it.
Yep, I'm on it. I'll be a good secretary, I promise.
Yay.
All right. Okay. Dia, are you there?
Yes.
All right, go for it.
Okay. Let's see. Well, first, thank you so much. This was just wonderful. I just loved everything you said. And I just have to say that I think what terrible childhoods these people had to have endured. And that I think what's happened, I'm not a psychologist, but I think they've identified with their tormentors and to such an extent that their souls have been subsumed, and their viewpoint is a projection of what was instilled in them and what was told to them, and they just have so completely imploded and collapsed inside. But there's also such a rage and anger that's coming out of them, and so yes, the infection that they represent is like coming to a boil, and they're really just going to explode. I mean, they may bring the earth with them, but you can just see it building more and more, and they're trying so hard to destroy others when I think there really is a sort of death wish that they want to destroy themselves, and it's such a tragedy. I read this one guy said that he and his brother were sent to a British boarding school, and when they arrived, they were told to cremate their teddy bears. And you think of all the traumatic things to do to kids and what, all these quote elites suffered at those schools was just horrific. And they've been
I think that was beautifully said, and I 100% agree. And if you look at just like the Huxleys, Julian Huxley is the oldest, Aldous is the youngest. They had a middle brother. He committed suicide. Right. He hung himself from a tree on their grounds, and they didn't find his body until a week later. And they were under immense pressure. Aldous even said he was a little bit happy that he lost his eyesight to such a degree because he wouldn't be under the kind of pressure that Julian was under. He felt like he had a bit of a breather, and he had more freedom to explore certain things that he wouldn't have had if he had lost his eyesight, as well, maybe to such a degree that he did.
Sorry. Maybe he even lost his eyesight because he simply didn't want to see all that he was experiencing.
Who knows? And Julian Huxley, he had gone through shock therapy during the London bombings. He had a lot of anxiety issues, and they were even performing shock therapy on him. So it is a very anti-human outlook, to the point of even how they treat their own children, their own kind, or what
it's just
would be people that
generation to generation, I think.
Yeah, and that's also something that's not ultimately sustainable. I mean, look at Biden's children, what he did to his children. That's not something that ultimately can grow and flourish either, to continue that kind of warped ideology either. That even though it's been going on for centuries, if we look at it, it's always been something that has to latch onto something else that actually has a foundation to it. And that's what Lewis was also bringing up in the Abolition of Man, that nobody can construct their own values. And even if you try to construct what is considered a different value system, like what they're trying to do with Darwinism and so forth, you can't help but still borrow and take from the old value system, the one and only, universal value system. And it's kind of, I guess, how you can think about good and evil, right? That the power of evil, which how I define it is just an opposition to the good, to the laws of the universe. Evil can only have power by twisting what has already been something good that exists, because you only have force and power through the good. And the most powerful evil is a twisting, a misshaping of the good. But it again tells us like where the true power comes from, because that will always be an inferiority to what is the good and the power within the good. So that hopefully didn't sound too flaky and abstract, but that
No.
it is actually a physical, reality in the world that we live in.
Well, there were two more things I wanted to say quickly.
Sure.
One was you, I listened to a podcast or whatever it's called, and you said so beautifully that I think you had a very strict mother, and she had said how, it was best to be safe and live safely. I was brought up that way too, and it was really very devastating to me. And I found my way, but what you had said was there, rather than the way of safety, there really is a reality to living by your soul's wishes. And you made it so much more concrete for me, which I can't describe it exactly, but it really was very powerful. So I really appreciated your saying that. And the second or third, whatever, is I studied botany and biology. And one thing that never seems to be brought up with evolution is plant evolution. And in my biology class, what we were taught was that, and it's fascinating, is that plants and animals had absolutely parallel trajectories. So in a sense, I don't know about plants encephalization. Maybe there's something to that, but I was taught a whole different way to look at things. For example, amphibians and the bryophytes or the thallophytes, the simpler organisms had a certain parallel adaptations. And then as the land grew drier and there was more environment that was drier, then plants and animals both adapted to that lack of water. They were less dependent reproductively on water, and they developed, like the egg and the seed are the exact same construct. Okay, they're both, they have shells, they have the embryo, and they have the food for the embryo. And that's what I'm trying to say. And like in terms of the gymnosperms, they parallel the reptiles, or there's parallel development, because the to survive in drier environments, habitats, the gymnosperms develop scales on their bark. They develop bark with scales. The reptiles also had scales, and they also developed, the plants developed seeds, and the reptiles developed eggs. And then when the mammals and the angiosperms came along, the angiosperms had internal fertilization, and so did the mammals. You see what I'm saying? So there were, anyway, so,
well, that you're saying that you're seeing an intention, a directionality in how things are being shaped in different.
I'm not sure what I was taught, and I'm not sure about directionality. I just can't say about that, but I can say in terms of adaptation that these creatures had parallel technological changes to their physiology and so on, that helped them adapt and they both
Mhm.
had the same kinds of adaptations.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, and that kind of is in line too with the observation of wings for flight. So the way that the fossil records show this is that you had this development of various different kinds of species that were developing wings for flight in all these different parts of the world. Really overlapping in time period. And so it, again, didn't fit Darwin's theory of natural selection, that this would be selected upon by the environment and then it would, spread to these other locations. But rather we saw that there were independent processes trying to form the same thing around the same time.
well, it's interesting too, because it was a whole new environment. And once the animals had developed legs and arms and so on, out of that somehow that's the wonderful mystery of it all, is somehow wings evolved that could take to the air and adjust to a whole new habitat, a whole new environment. So yeah, it's just wondrous. And one thing I'm trying to do is develop computer animation that teaches of the beauty of nature, the beauty of the earth, and how all things relate to each other. I've learned 2D animation, but I need uh, to find a 3D animation place to do things like a journey through a leaf. I want to show, I mean, it's just amazing what goes on inside a little leaf, every single little leaf. And just to have people see all the and experience all that goes on inside a leaf and inside a cell and all these other things too. So
Definitely need to popularize that. So the art of multimedia and animation would be really valuable. And I'd be curious to see some of your work already. If you could send me an email maybe and just share some of what you've been
sure,
working on, could be
yeah,
useful.
that would be
Uh,
great. And also, oh, I forgot what I was going to say.
well, let's circle back to you because we do have a list of people
I'm
who have
sorry.
been
Yes,
waiting,
yes,
and then if there's time, we'll hopefully have your memory jump
yes.
on this last question.
I'm sorry to take so long.
No, it was
No,
great.
no worries. Yeah,
It's a
thank
pleasure.
you,
It's
Dia.
absolutely a
It was
pleasure. And I
nice.
think you're gonna love you probably already looked into Vernadsky, so I think that this is something that yeah, I'm sure resonates exactly with what Cynthia's been talking about and what Vernadsky's been talking about for a long time.
Yeah.
Um, we have here Kelly.
Hi. Um, yeah, I guess like everyone else, I'm thanking you for the privilege of being on your quality show. Because it truly is a quality place to be here. Yeah, it's like that's part of my comment. You were talking about um, uh,
Oh, I
you know,
know.
like a lot of people, including myself, it's like we go through life and it's I guess I got what is it? Power issues, like control issues, and it's like you want to control more of your space around you, and we kind of get frustrated and all that. And, it ties in with the pleasure and pain. And then you mentioned the like the quality part of it, and it's like I already know that, but it's just the way you said it. It kind of sunk in a little bit more this time, and yeah, like even like when we're helping others, you mentioned that it could be like an addiction to help, like I want to help more and more people, in my community, where I think subconsciously I've been doing, like, since I've been kind of attending these lectures, subconsciously I think I have been doing like a little bit more of the quantity part or the quality part of it. I'm sorry. And yeah, just I think from what I saw today, I just see it more in what's going on and how I'm relating to it, and it's kind of exciting because it's not necessarily more. you know. Yeah, thanks.
Cool, man. Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, quality is always leading in the dance between quantity, right? They work together, but one has to lead, and it always has to be quality. And I think that that's something, I don't know if you've got a thought that you'd like to add to that, Cynthia, but I was thinking about just this question of people sometimes feeling a little intimidated by the quantity of problems that have built up in the world, and they feel a little bit like overwhelmed by the magnitude of it all. And it renders a lot of people sort of like stationary, kind of frozen, and frustrated, and a lot of toxic emotions can arise. But when you have a view of the quality importance, like no matter what good you do, different people who have, ventured to different degrees on the path of epistemological development can obviously lift different weights and have a different amplitude as a resonance within the greater continuity of the human experience. Obviously, a Socrates or a Christ or a Confucius has a huge resonance. They've really, they've cultivated some psychospiritual moral muscles to a very high degree where they could intervene or Benjamin Franklin, on a very, very powerful wavelength. But everybody can amplify that goodness to the varying degrees, and we could always use our will to make choices so that we can build our capacities and have bigger amplitudes and effectiveness. So the question is always, we always have to appreciate the goods that we do, and have a sense that there's something immortal and eternal being expressed, even in the small goods, and knowing that as we do and find a love for those goods, we can increase the amplitude of those goods with greater powers of knowledge that can have greater degrees of goodness over time, with the ideal of always having the greatest possible good impacted into the bookends of our birth and death, which, obviously we'll never fully achieve that, but that's the point of an ideal, right? You're always aiming towards that while we're breathing, and knowing that, again, quality always precedes quantity, which the Bertrand Russellites and the Yuval Hararis, they hate that. They want quantity to be imposed on qualities, which you did very well, Cynthia, in your presentation.
Yeah, they're such extreme examples of like what can happen to a human being if they go through the abusive situation they clearly did go through as children, as Dia, I think, so beautifully had expressed. But the vast majority of us are not that, but we've been told that we should also use these people as our models. And like, no wonder we have such a cynical, pessimistic, depressed society, because nobody wants to be that, and nobody is really that. And these people, they had, like, points in their life where there was a moment in time where they liked, better things. Like Bertrand Russell apparently did read Schiller, and really enjoyed Schiller. But he had a very domineering environment that, really tried to brainwash that out of him. So I feel like I'm just saying the same thing over and over again, but we have gone through something unnatural. We have to acknowledge that we've gone through something unnatural in telling us who we are and the universe that we live in. And there is a bit of a process where we have to kind of not condition is not the right word, because we're returning to something that is already naturally within us, that we are harmonically tuned to that. So even though we've been told all these lies, we're unhappy because our harmonic tuning has remained the same. So we have to intellectually rewire, but that's not everything that you are, right? Like spiritually, you are already harmonically tuned, but intellectually, we've been weighed down with a lot of false predicates, and it's the intellectual work to return to our spiritual harmonic tuning, again, not to sound flaky or anything, that we become our happiest. And so there's a certain amount of work that we have to do in that, but it becomes much easier, and you do feel like this is how you attain inner peace is to have that connection to that harmonic tuning that is already within you. And the reason why we don't feel at peace with ourselves is because we've been unnaturally separated with that, but through an intellectual process.
Marilyn, I know you've been waiting for a while. It's all yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Cynthia, for a really outstanding presentation. I really enjoyed it. So insightful and so inspiring. And I want to also thank the previous speaker, I think it was Kelly, who mentioned Alana Hartsock's letter to King Charles, which is excellent. I recommend that for everyone. She's a friend of mine, and we talk a lot about these things. And she's done great work on the land value taxation proposal, which combined with Ellen Brown's work on public banks would be a really wonderful new way of organizing the way we live together on this earth. They're both really, I recommend them highly. Just a quick comment and then a question. One comment, when you say you think that humanity will prevail, I couldn't agree more. Even when the brainwashing and the repression and the manipulation of our minds seems so overwhelming, humanity always, it ekes out, it seeps out here and there. I saw this during the lockdowns 3 years ago. I live in an area that the San Francisco Bay Area, which is sadly was very, very susceptible to the fear mongering, and so many people here just went along with the program. But nevertheless, I found lots of people some who analyzed it deeply, but a lot of others, some of my neighbors, some of my extended family members, they hadn't really thought about it deeply. They just sensed something was wrong there and they resisted it instinctively. And I so embraced that. And I think we see that if we look around at how people act day to day, they often do resist these attempts at tyranny, and their better humanity comes through all the time. So let's celebrate that. The question I have for you, Cynthia, is relates something I think related to the themes that you developed today, and I'm referring to some of the things that are being promoted by one of Yuval Harari's contemporaries, namely Bill Gates, and his efforts to control and manipulate our food system. Vandana Shiva wrote about this extensively in her book, Oneness versus the 1%. Where she talks about how the Gates model wants to reduce food production to, again, a bunch of mathematical algorithms and computer programs, and really replace all of the millennia of knowledge of farmers who've actually worked with the earth and with, as the previous speaker said, with the interconnectedness of humans and nature. And, and Vandana Shiva, of course, has this wonderful movement in India where they promote the regenerative farming and saving of seeds and developing new kinds of seeds that are in harmony with the soils, healthy soils in the earth, and how all of these natural processes can be worked together in a way that celebrates life and as opposed to the sterility of the mechanization of our food system. So I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
You mean the solution out of that, or?
Well, but just like how dangerous do you think that the Bill Gates model of food production is looming over us versus the more healthy solutions that Vandana Shiva proposes?
It's very dangerous from my perspective, what Bill Gates is doing with the food production. And also, we're having these weird situations in the States where what is it, Matt, like these trains carrying like toxic stuff are being exploded so that it's released into the air in like agricultural areas, so that everything is like dying in these areas. So this is part of the warfare that we're in. We are in a war right now, and it's not just a war being fought against foreign countries. It's a war that's at the same time being fought on its own people, which is this often happens in times of war. It's not something new, but we see the energy and the food availability is being consciously reduced so that there will be an artificial scarcity in these things. And there, for me, it's dangerous, but it's not like, again, I don't believe that these things can succeed in terms of a long-term structure, but it can do a lot of damage in a short-term period. And that is something that hopefully people are going to snap out of it a little bit in terms of understanding how basic energy works, how basic food production works. But as you're saying, there's really good work happening in India on both energy and food policies. India has really started to push back on these policies where they were being told to adopt a clear orientation that was going to reduce the livelihood of the people living in India, and also, you know, cause early death in a lot of their population. Like the World Economic Forum meeting that happened in January, February, this past January, February, I was actually really nicely surprised by a lot of the Indian delegates that were representing the energy sector, and they were basically, you know, telling the Davos crowd, like, listen, the renewable energy just doesn't have the capability to sustain the people that are living in India, and our goal is to sustain the people in India. So there's a clear pushback from a lot of countries in Asia and in Africa too. A lot of African leaders are pushing back on these anti-human policies. The West, unfortunately, I think still has a lot of lag in their recognition of this. Obviously, in Asia and Africa, this isn't something new. They've experienced a lot of tragedy, so it's much easier for the people to understand this, and it's not some kind of weird conspiracy theory for them. That's like, this has been something they've had to fight against for a very long time. So the policies are dangerous, but at the same time, because there are solutions in other parts of the world, it always makes for the addressing of the crisis easier when you have other parts of the world who are actually have competent understanding of food and energy and would offer help if they were asked. So that's, I guess, like the more optimistic way of looking at it.
Thank you.
They're not eating bugs, and yet they're
Right,
living
right.
longer and having abundance. Why do we have to eat bugs and live shorter lives?
And we also have a lot of local organic farmers who produce our food locally, who do work with the soil and with the organisms. And you know, I get every 2 weeks I get a CSA, community supported agriculture, from local farms right in my area, where they are dedicated to those more healthy principles of real food.
Yeah. And it's so great to see you, Marilyn, in in person, because we've been talking for a bit.
Yeah.
And no, there's competent farming, and I think, you know, there were certain policies under Roosevelt actually that really helped with making farming better, and creating like the breadbasket of California and so forth, because, you know, they had like a real crisis where the dust was just blowing everywhere. They couldn't keep the earth. It was a similar problem that certain areas in Africa suffer from drought areas, and they were able to address this with like very competent, you know, scientific policies in agriculture, which have been, you know, as with every sector in the sciences, they try to remove people from an actual physical reality in the world of consequences, and they try to have you adopt these abstract models that have no application in the real world. You know, we'll see how serious it becomes, but there's so much sanity that's happening right now that I think it can be contained if yeah. Sorry.
No,
I'm a
I
little
think
bit
I think it's
tired.
an important topic. Like, somebody should really, maybe we should either ourselves or ask somebody who's done the work to do an exposition on Roosevelt's example of the rehabilitation of farming that created so much provable abundance in opposition to those Malthusians, even back then, who were trying to make the argument that we have to reduce the world population under a one world government, which Roosevelt sabotaged on like 3 separate occasions. He broke this New World Order agenda, which had the ideological commitments, as you outlined by H.G. Wells, Bertrand Russell, to reduce the world population under a slave society of masters. That's not a new thing. That goes back then. But Roosevelt did such damage to that agenda by proving what a human form of natural law government could actually do in agriculture, that it blended both a holistic approach to natural farming practices, while at the same time still allowing industrial and technological powers to be involved in the farming process. But it wasn't an either or, which is, I think, the problem that I tend to encounter. And I don't know, you probably have all noticed something similar, that there's these dualisms where we're told we either have to have industrial farming and technology and have no nutrition and just have Monsanto, or we just have to all like disassemble ourselves into little mini communes all over the world of local like mini growers doing everything purely the way we did it back in the medieval ages. And there's like no idea of what Roosevelt did to unite both, the best of both worlds, that allowed for, individual autonomy of farmers that worked in co-ops, but that also, and had a lot of sovereignty, but at the same time used technology, right? Yeah, it's a worthwhile thing. Well, we have a little bit more time, but not too much more time. So Dia, I don't know if you have your question popping back into your memory.
Yes, I did. I
Okay.
was just thinking in terms of my computer animations, that those could be movies that Yuval Harari would have let the useless eaters watch. I mean, maybe my message would have to be made more subtle, but to give some kind of subtle ray of hope and sort of subtle propaganda for how beautiful the earth is and that we don't have to live like this.
Propaganda, good guys. Quality good propaganda for sure. So yeah, send me an email with some ideas and maybe some displays of your work so far, and we'll
Okay.
we'll keep brainstorming.
Okay, thank you so much. Well, I did talk
Sure.
with a company. I emailed a company called Squeeze. I live in the Adirondacks. So it's a company that's in Quebec City and Montreal. And just giving them a basic idea of my idea. I didn't want to tell too much, but and just asking, to collaborate if they'd like to, but I haven't heard anything from them, and I don't have high expectations.
Let's keep let the meet email. We'll talk.
Okay.
Cool. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank
Okay.
you.
So we have time for maybe 2 more. I saw a digital hand arise on Nick Newman's computer, but you don't
Yes,
look like
you
a Nick
did.
Newman.
Yeah, I am Nick Newman, actually.
Oh, you are. Oh, okay. Hello,
Yeah,
Nick Newman.
no, I just sent you a little text saying I don't have my own Zoom account, so he put a Zoom account on my computer, so now I'm officially Nick Newman.
Oh, okay. Congratulations.
Talking about change of genders, right? Here you go.
When in Rome.
Absolutely. First off, Cynthia, thank you so much. I enjoy everything you do. It's just a real treat. Thank you for what you're doing. I had a couple of
Thank you.
comments that I'll try to go through very, very quickly that I think tie together. One is H.G. Wells's Island of Dr. Moreau. So in that, I think this will all tie together. There is a series of freaks, right, that Dr. Moreau creates through vivisection, and he gives them they have to go through this conditioning experience where they get a particular religion, and they have a person who runs their little religion. He's one of the transformed animals turned into humans. And so part of it's through hypnosis and part of it's through repetition. So every time he says certain things, everybody falls down and these creatures fall down and say the same thing. And so to make a long story short, at the very end, the island completely goes to pot, and the creatures who've been transformed are then go back into their natural biological state. They return into animalhood. So if you flash forward to Harari, you're dealing with a different time where the way you're going to control the creatures, right, is through video games and drugs. So at one point you have a solution of how to control the masses, you know, through kind of biological intervention. Now you have a different paradigm that could say, well, you can control the masses through this technological intervention. But it's the same thing. It's a kind of hypnosis. But the interesting thing about Harari, which does not compute unless you really want to get dark, is Harari is a proponent of 2 or 3 months a year of this meditation technique he goes through. And he's very proud of the fact that he spends 2 or 3 months a year in this meditation technique. Now, the technique is called, I looked it up, it's called Vatapasana, Vatapasana. And Vatapasana's meditation technique is used by people all over the world. And he has these seminars. I don't think he charges very much, if anything at all, to participate in this. I don't know where Harari goes. I think they're probably actually meeting places for this to take place. So I'm sitting here thinking, here's a guy, not a particularly attractive or charismatic guy to be the apostle for the WEF, who at the same time is a proponent of this particular technique. It doesn't add up. Why? You know, so unless, of course, you could go back to the island of Dr. Moreau and you could say there's them and then there's us. So you have a kind of free will that's allocated to certain numbers of people in society, because these people, as stupid as they are, also realize that there's got to be some evolutionary aspect to the human being. So what do? Do you keep a certain section of society able to have free will and evolve in a way, and the rest you drug with drugs and video games? So you can control the masses so they're no problem to you. And then at the same time, you allow yourself a certain kind of freedom. And Harari's very proud about the fact that, you know, he'll talk about the fact that he has, it's very difficult. He found it almost impossible to concentrate his thoughts, to think about one thing for even 15 minutes. So he was very proud about the fact that he is now able to do that, probably can do it for longer than 15 minutes. I don't know anything about this technique. I know some people who do it. I'm not particularly interested, but it's kind of an interesting problem here. You know, what is going on here? It puts a little bit more depth into who this individual is or what's going on behind the scenes. And I agree with you, he's probably managed. His history book, Sapiens, I mean, talk about history, what a joke. So, and there are a lot of very normal people who have some degree of intelligence who would look at it as a history book and call it a joke too. And they're not even close to where you're at. So I don't know. So that's one particular thing. The other thing is, in terms of another venue, you have Alexander Dugin, who talks about the death of socialism and the death of communism, fascism as well. And he postulates the rise of individual sovereignty, cultural sovereignty, honoring one's cultural background, national background, as well as individual sovereignty, and the importance of that going forward, which I think ties into a lot of what you're saying. And I guess my last point is moment of perception. Our moment of perception, because we're only allowed for 80 years, alive for 80 years roughly, right? Our moment of perception is very, very small. So you are on the spearhead of perhaps this ink blot technique, where there are many people, not many compared to the great mass, but many people who are thinking this way. That may congeal at a certain point. It looks absolutely slow. I mean, creepy, crawly slow, right? Because our moment of perception is so small. So if we can expand what our notion of time is, if we even want to believe it exists, but if we can expand what our notion of time is, and then you put everything you're doing, everything people are feeding into you through your meetings and other things that are going on in the world, of which there are very many, we may be seeing an extraordinarily accelerated moment. And then you have to look at this whole paradigm and intuit it very differently. So anyway, those are my few comments, and I will put myself back on mute. Mr. Newman will put himself back on mute.
No, that was a very interesting contribution you gave, and I don't really have much to add. I think that those are very interesting lines of inquiry that deserve further reflection and thought on, and I think you made very good points in what you're looking at, and definitely I will keep in mind these points you're making about Harari as well in further lines of work that we do on this. But I don't really have much to add to that, Matt. I don't know if you have anything. Is very interesting.
I think those are very good reflections. A thought that occurred to me that I think you demonstrated very well in your class and in your recent essay, Cynthia, is this notion that there's a small percentage of humanity that will be given access to the so-called like creative evolutionary freedom, whereas the masses have to remain in the shadow in the caves, living as sort of a slave class and happy about it in various ways that involve, creating soma and different forms of video games to keep people complacent and happy, or maybe CRISPR babies that are programmed to be stupid and happy doing repetitive rhythms. But I mean, that's something that the oligarchy, I think, tells themselves and has projected to themselves as their own governing myth, because they create myths for the masses, myths for themselves, and they start believing their own myths too, And I think one of the conditions upon which the creative class will be allowed to access their sort of the creative insights, the way that H.G. Wells or Aldous Huxley were granted access to a greater degree of spectrum of their creative powers, is under the condition that they're groomed and broken of something fundamentally human first. And under that condition, that you stay loyal to the boundary conditions of this inhumane self-professed god class, then yeah, you can use your creativity, on a leash. But they put the leash on themselves, and I have not seen any evidence that no matter how high up in the echelons of the hierarchy you go, there's no evidence that at any point there's actual humans who are free without leashes. And I think Plato's demonstration of some of the stuff in his Gorgias dialogue, demonstrating that the greatest tyrant who has the greatest power to punish their enemies, reward their friends, satisfy their desires, and create more fleshly desires, like an addiction that they're always chasing, but they have the power to satisfy, unlike the fool who just has addictions to pleasure but can't satisfy them. That's pathetic. But says Gorgias's ideologues or his disciples, the person who has the power to actualize those ever increasing degrees of addictions, that is the greatest free man and the greatest happy man. And Socrates is just making the point that no, that's actually the greatest slave and the most pathetic of creatures. And he demonstrates it for pure dialectic reason and rigor, and he just dismantles them and humiliates them. And I think that they haven't forgiven Socrates 2,500 years later for having done what he did, and reminded us all, every generation, that no, the greatest tyrant is the greatest slave. So as far as everything else you brought up, no, there's a lot of points to consider and reflect upon for sure.
So who's presenting next week?
Next week is Hugo Krüger, who's an engineer, a chemical engineer, scientist. He's going to go through something on, I don't think he would like me to call him a scientist. I think of him as that, but he has a podcast. He does work in Africa and in Iran. And he's got a big network of friends the pro-nuclear sane community, and he's going to go through the fallacy of the linear no threshold hypothesis that has demonized or got us all to be afraid of these invisible entities called radiation. Radiation's alpha and beta particles that are everywhere, killing us, and we have to just shut down all of our nuclear power to stay safe from these invisible entities. And it's all based on, pseudoscientific hullabaloo fraud. And so he's going to go through a little bit of that and some ideas on energy policy that I think will be of value. That'll be 2 p.m. next Sunday.
Great.
So Cynthia, thank you so much for sharing today. Thank you everybody for coming on board and sharing in this process of discovery, and hope to see everybody next week.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Here we go.
Thank you very
Bye.
much.
Thanks,
All right,
Cynthia.
thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.